important for tomorrow. And I want to start off by asking some questions. These are rhetorical questions, and I'm going to come off a little cynical at the end, but I'll get to why I don't actually believe them. So, what are human rights? Why is the United States, and why are our rights so exceptional when compared to the other great allies of democracy and freedom in Europe, and even those that neighbor us? Is this ideological concept of American exceptionalism true, or are we just buying into patriotic, flag-waving propaganda? What of Canada, Germany, Mexico, France, or even our originator, the United Kingdom? Aren't these also lovers of liberty and human rights? Let's start, first of all, with Germany, whose constitution we even helped write after World War II. Let's talk about, how about private property? It's vital to all of us. We all live in a home that we pay for. We all own things, cars, clothing, it's all private property. And it's very important to the founding fathers of that. Well, Chapter 1, Article 14 of the German Constitution says property and the right of inheritance are guaranteed. Well, there you have it, in black and white. They have the right to private property. And it's just as guaranteed as ours, isn't it? Well, if you continue reading, their content and limits are determined by statute, that is, by law. So the German Bundeswehr, which is their Congress, could easily pass a law that limits private property. That doesn't sound very guaranteed to me. What about Chapter 1, Article 5 of the German Constitution? Freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, the rights that are in our First Amendment to the Constitution. Well, Chapter 1, Article 5 of the German Constitution says that everyone has the right to freely express and disseminate his opinion and speech, writing and pictures, and to freely inform himself from generally accessible sources. Freedom of the press and freedom of reporting by means of broadcasts and films are guaranteed. There's that word again, guaranteed. There will be no censorship. These rights, however, are subject to limitations in the provisions of general statutes and statutory provisions for the protection of the youth and in the right to personal honor. Not very guaranteed again. Well, what about France? Well, France does have a written constitution that guarantees all the rights in black and white without limitations, without the government able to come in and their parliament be able to change everything. They do that. However, does it really mean much when they change the Constitution every 2 years? I don't know. Can you seriously trust the words of a document that has changed 28 times in 63 years? Okay, well, what about Mexico? All right, that's a close country. It's a nice allied nation just to the south of the border. They're a democracy too. But what about property? Article 27 of their Constitution says property of all land and water within national territory is originally owned by the nation, who has the right to transfer this ownership to particulars. Hence, private property is a privilege created by the nation. That just says it outright. There is no private property in Mexico. The government determines what you own and what you can't own. I would like to add that this is actually the amended Article 27 that strengthened private property in Mexico in 1992. I would hate to have lived in it before 92. What about the right to bear arms? That's an important freedom. We recently got a court case that strengthened our Second Amendment. Well, for the Mexicans, they have a Second Amendment of their own. It's actually, I think, Article 10. Inhabitants of the Republic may, for their protection, own guns and arms in their homes. Well, there you go. We finally have a right that's not subject to government limitations, right? Except only arms approved by the Army may be owned, and federal law will state the manner in which they can be used. And it turns out about 99.9% of firearms are illegal according to Mexican law. You can only own a .38 handgun. And those are extremely expensive. So, Mexico, France, Germany. What about the United Kingdom? Well, the United Kingdom. Ooh. Well, there's the story of Alfie Evans, a toddler, who had a genetic condition just a few years ago. His parents were barred from determining what was best for their child by British courts several times. The British healthcare system had refused to continue treating Alfie and were content to let him die. Obviously, the parents of the child weren't particularly fond of that idea and sought treatment for their child in the US. And they got approved with an experimental program in the US to treat him. However, the UK court stepped in and decided it was time for Alfie to die in violation of the parents' and Alfie's rights according to our Constitution. It was better and legal, according to the UK government, for Alfie to surely die than possibly survive. Well, what about freedom of press? Well, there was a person, a YouTube personality, called Count Dankula, who was charged with and convicted of hate speech for teaching his dog to do a Nazi salute. Now, as much as I don't like the Nazi salute, he did it for a joke, but he still got charged and convicted of hate speech, and they seized $800 directly from his bank account. So there's private property and freedom of expression. Finally, Canada. Oh, Canada. That's their song, I think. Well, I mean, you have just a few days ago, Justice Minister David Lametti saying, you don't have an absolute right to own private property in Canada. He just says it outright, and I like that. I like that a lot. All these wonderful, great allies of democracy, nations we trust, and they don't guarantee their rights. Doesn't matter to them what their documents say, because they can change their documents to say anything they want it. Okay, well here's two other examples. China and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. These are nations that do not guarantee any private rights. There are no rights of men, of humans, but their constitutions do say they have rights. So freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, they just don't adhere to it. They wrote all the rights and liberties of their people, but they never followed through, and they never enforced it. For the United States, we did something different. We're right in between them. Just like China and the DPRK, we have a document that says our rights, clear as day, no government limitations. But unlike the DPRK in China, we did our best to enforce it. We did our best to protect those rights. Well, and unlike our allies of democracy, we do have that written, unlike them. So, for us, there is no right to, that's subject to government limitations. It's the opposite in the US Constitution. The document and our rights put limits on the government. Our rights expand at the expense of the government. We went from 10 amendments that enumerated our rights to 18. No privileges of the government given to people. See, government in our nation is a privilege granted by the people. Every official elected is elected at the behest of the voter. The government exists because we as Americans allow it to. But we can still become one or the other. We could change our Constitution. It would be very hard, but if we don't pay attention to the document, we don't pay attention to procedure to amend the Constitution, they could determine that it says whatever they want it to say, just like all the other nations we see. Or we could just continue as we are. Strengthen our Constitution. Keep a close eye on government. We must remain a nation of limited government and free people, as our Constitution was intended for. And that's about it. Just wanted to point out our allies are not as free as they would like us to think, and our enemies are not as free as they say they should be. So,
Thank you.